Tonight, an NBC5 investigation is raising serious questions about the Fort Worth Police Department's handling of sexual assault cases. We've learned hundreds of times Fort Worth police have failed to test sexual assault evidence kits in the amount of time required by state law. Senior investigative reporter Scott Friedman reveals why it's happening and how the delays can leave justice shelved for victims.
Texas passed a law in 2019 to eliminate a statewide backlog of untested rape kits. The law sets strict timelines for police and crime labs to process kits. But 5 years later, records we've obtained show Fort Worth police often miss deadlines by months or years, leaving victims in limbo. It began with a night out, celebrating a friend's birthday at a club. It ended in a Fort Worth parking lot where Latrice Godfrey says an acquaintance who gave her a ride home stopped the car and then raped her.
It's just...
Family members took her to a Fort Worth hospital for a sexual assault examination.
I didn't know what a rape kit is or what it would do.
She completed the testing process, then met with detectives and prosecutors who eventually obtained a grand jury indictment against the man accused of assaulting her. But as the case moved forward, Latrice wondered about the status of that rape kit, the key physical evidence.
So I said, hey, did they test my kit? She said, no, not yet. I'm like, okay. Is this normal?
Latrice says she would periodically log into the state's Track It system, where victims can check the status of their kit. Almost a year later, the system showed it still wasn't processed.
11 months.
11 months.
Almost an entire year, and the kit had not even been tested?
Have not been tested.
Under a Texas law that took effect in 2019, police departments must submit each kit to a lab within 30 days of receiving it, and labs must complete testing within 90 days. But NBC5 Investigates has obtained state records showing Fort Worth police have frequently failed to meet those deadlines over the last 5 years. Out of more than 1,700 kits collected, 767 arrived late at the lab, meaning police missed the 30-day deadline 43% of the time. 412 were submitted more than 100 days late, 28 more than a year late. And hundreds of kits were not lab tested in the required 90 days. Records the state provided this week show Fort Worth police currently have 901 untested kits that are past the 90-day testing deadline.
It takes so much to come forward. It takes so much to go through that exam for it to be mishandled and just to be sitting on the shelf like, oh, we get to it when we get to it, when my healing journey is relying on that.
Fort Worth is the only police department in Texas with its own forensic biology lab. So how does a department that can do its own testing miss deadlines hundreds of times? Fort Worth police turned down our request to speak with the lab staff, directing us instead to a public information officer.
This is a police department. Why is the police department not following the law?
The police department is outsourcing because within we don't have the ability to test all those cases.
But even if they're outsourced, it's supposed to be completed within 90 days, and you run a lab. You're a unique police department. You have a lab in-house.
Our lab has 2 people that are able to do cases right now, or 3 positions that are filled.
Sergeant Leah Wagner explained, like many labs across the state, Fort Worth has struggled to hire forensic scientists who can conduct DNA testing. Of the 3 currently on staff, 2 are still in a 2-year-long training process and cannot conduct DNA tests on their own.
This is the 12th largest city in the United States.
You're right. And
how does a department get to the point where you have only 3 people on staff that can conduct this very important testing?
So we have 8 spots that are allotted. 5 are vacant at this time. They've tried recruiting.
The department says the lab was so short-staffed it was unable to conduct any rape kit testing for 7 months in 2021, creating a bigger backlog. And Wagner says the department has difficulty finding private labs willing to accept enough kits to clear the backlog.
If they've cut you off, how are you going to send them if they've said no more? Where do you send them if they tell you no more?
So you're saying this is the fault of labs not taking the kits from you. That's
I'm
why
saying-
you're not submitting them
saying-
in the required time?
I'm saying that's part of the problem.
Law enforcement should be following the law.
State Representative Victoria Niave Criado authored the law that set the testing deadlines. She says the state has made tens of millions of dollars available to police departments so they can send kits to private labs and clear backlogs.
The funding is there. There is no excuse for a rape kit to not be timely submitted and tested.
You know, those are people. Those are not just kits. Those are not just trinkets on a shelf.
Lavinia Masters knows how testing delayed can mean justice denied. The law creating the testing deadlines is named for Masters. She was sexually assaulted in Dallas at 13 years old. Her kit sat on a shelf for 21 years. By the time her attacker was identified, the statute of limitations had run out.
We cannot have that mindset that these kids are so old that they don't matter. These victims matter.
During our interview with Fort Worth Police, they suggested victims who want their kit tested on time should repeatedly call the department and ask for testing.
The more that you come forward and say, hey, I need to know this, the more it lets that detective know, hey, this person, we really need to push forward because.
But should those victims have to beg the department to conduct the test, or should the department just do the test the way the law requires?
The test is going to be done regardless. Even if it's done a little later because of the backlog, that test is still being done.
A department that delays is helping a rapist. A department that delays is impacting a rape survivor.
Representative Niave Criado believes the state needs to create incentive programs to help labs recruit and retain more DNA analysts. But she says city leaders also need to use funding already available to seek out more private labs to help. Fort Worth Police told us they're trying to identify additional labs, but could not provide an estimate on when they might clear the backlog.
We care about these people. We care about our victims. We care about everybody. We are hampered by the tools that we're being given or not given.
Latrice Godfrey says the delay in her testing made her feel police didn't care.
What did this do to your trust in the system, the justice system?
It damaged it. It just shattered it.
Prosecutors eventually dropped the charges against the suspect in her case, one day after the man's attorney argued his client was being denied the right to a speedy trial. The Tarrant County District Attorney's Office tells us testing delays were not a factor in what they said was a difficult decision to drop the case after careful consideration of all of the evidence. But Latrice still wonders if a delay played a role, and she's speaking out, hoping police will process future evidence in the time required by law.
I would appreciate that no one behind me will have to go through what I am going through.
In our reporting, we spoke to forensic labs across the state that say the industry is experiencing a hiring crisis. Some said they need better funding to boost salaries and attract and keep lab staff. We're going to keep digging into solutions, Brittany, and report back.
Fort Worth's police chief is making an extraordinary apology to victims of sexual assault.
The chief's comments come in the wake of an NBC5 investigation that revealed Fort Worth police have missed state deadlines for processing rape kits hundreds and hundreds of times over the last 5 years. Senior investigative reporter Scott Friedman has the latest.
This is completely unacceptable, the situation we're in right now.
The chief's comments were forceful and direct, saying sexual assault survivors have a right to be angry with his department for failing to process hundreds of rape kits in the time required by state law.
And they're pissed off, and they should be. I'm pissed off. If this was my daughter, my wife, my mother, I would be as well.
Earlier this month, an NBC5 investigation revealed state records showing Fort Worth police had about 900 rape kits already past a 90-day state deadline and still awaiting full completion of the testing and analysis process. And more than 750 times over the last 5 years, state records show the department failed to even submit kits for processing in a state-required 30-day deadline. One woman who reported an assault, Latrice Godfrey, told us she waited almost a year.
11 months.
11 months.
Almost an entire year, and the kit had not even been tested?
Have not been tested.
Delays that have sparked anger and frustration among the city's top elected officials.
I am almost shaking. I'm just very unhappy with this information. We have failed victims in our city. We have failed not just victims, but we have failed their loved ones.
At today's council meeting, the chief laid out a plan to clear the backlog by April and said he and an assistant chief will personally manage the city's crime lab until the problem is solved. He said every option is on the table, including using more private contractors and hiring bonuses to fill 5 vacant lab positions, which police say have caused the delays.
I take full responsibility for the situation we're in right now, and I take full responsibility for correcting this and getting this right.
Mayor Matty Parker responded, telling the chief if Fort Worth is going to have a crime lab, it must be best in class.
This crime lab has been a problem in the city of Fort Worth for 10 years. And I mention that, Chief, because it's not just your problem. It is a management problem. And it, at this point now, lies at our feet to solve it. And I can tell by the urgency in the voices of my colleagues that they agree that they're going to solve it.
The mayor also paused to acknowledge Latrice Godfrey for speaking out about the delays. Godfrey listening from the audience to the mayor's words.
And it is unfortunate that it's taken a public outcry and a beautiful victim in Latrice Godfrey, who's here today.
And as Godfrey left the meeting, a personal apology from the police chief. Scott Friedman, NBC5 Investigates.
New developments tonight in that massive backlog of sexual assault evidence in Fort Worth. It's a story you heard here first.
Yes, Fort Worth Police Chief Neil Noakes acknowledged today that he was aware a year ago that hundreds of rape kits had missed state testing deadlines. So why wasn't the problem corrected back then? Our senior investigative reporter Scott Friedman asked that question in a frank and open discussion with the chief today. Scott?
Yeah, guys, the chief's comments came in his first in-depth interview since NBC5 Investigates uncovered the rape kit backlog 1 month ago. He said the testing delays have affected far more victims than the department first acknowledged. He also said he was aware of the backlog in 2023, but did not do enough to make sure it was addressed. When did you first become aware that the department was behind to the tune of hundreds and hundreds of cases?
I think the first time I remember hearing anything was back in September of last year.
By December of 2023, state records we've obtained show Fort Worth's backlog of sex assault evidence was growing. 772 rape kits were not completed and already beyond the state's 90-day testing and analysis deadline.
Were folks not keeping you in the loop on what was happening to clear these cases? Do you feel like information was being withheld? Who ultimately is accountable for this?
I am. Ultimately, I'm accountable for this, and I'm not going to blame them for the information not getting to me. I don't believe anybody was withholding it intentionally. But as the leader of this department, it's my job when I know there's a problem to make sure I'm checking back. If I don't hear back, I can't just assume no news is good news.
Noakes says he made leadership changes at the crime lab and felt staff was focused on clearing the backlog. But he blames himself for not doing enough to make sure that was happening. By the time NBC5 Investigates uncovered the backlog last month, it had grown to about 900 cases, sparking outrage from victims and city council members.
We have failed victims in our city. We have failed not just victims, but we have failed their loved ones.
Today, Noakes acknowledged that over the last 5 years, the total number of cases that missed the 90-day deadline was even higher than 900. 1,218 times, he says, the department failed to comply.
What goes through your mind when you look at that number? That's an enormous number.
It's completely unacceptable. It's ridiculous. There's no reason it should ever be that big. We shouldn't even be talking about 1 or 2, quite frankly. But you're talking over 1,000, over 1,200 cases that missed the deadline. It's unacceptable.
Over the last several weeks, Noakes says staff has reduced the existing backlog to about 600. He says the department is close to hiring 4 DNA analysts to fill vacant positions that slowed testing. And he's asking the city for a consultant to examine the lab, suggesting if it can't be a model of excellence, it could be shut down.